And joining me to discuss the merits and the pitfalls of these different approaches are Francis Coppola, a financial economist and veteran of the banking industry, and also Patrick Minford, who is Professor of Applied Economics at Cardiff Business School and who's been cited by Liz Truss when it comes to her economic plans. Good morning, both of you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us bright and early ahead of the debate tonight. Patrick, you're supportive broadly of Liz Truss's approach. Why is that?
Well, I think it's important to get the supply side of the British economy going again with growth. I mean, growth has been very disappointing, and it's now become a priority to put in place policies to stimulate it. And I think that not doing these tax rises that have been put into the plan by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, the corporation tax rise and the rise in national insurance contributions that's already gone ahead are an important starting point in getting the supply side policies back onto track.
Now,
and
you talk
at
though.
the moment, of course, they're suggesting that we'll have quite a damaging effect on growth.
You talk about tax cuts promoting economic growth, but the Institute for Fiscal Studies say that none of the tax cuts that were proposed by any of the candidates during the Conservative leadership contest would do enough to pay for themselves.
Well, I don't think the Institute of Fiscal Studies has done up-to-date research on this point. I mean, we've estimated a model of the UK that fits the facts and matches the data behavior of the last few decades, and it shows clearly that what really matters for growth is the marginal tax rates on corporations, corporation tax being among the key ones there, and also, the rates of tax on workers, which national insurance contribution is very important because that pushes up wage costs. So these two things are really important elements that come out of the research.
Do you have a full house when it comes to global influences at the moment? I mean, Patrick, cutting taxes could be very inflationary, could push prices up even further and cause even more problems for people who are struggling with the cost of living.
Well, I think Francis made a good point about the 70s. It was a highly inflationary period, and we didn't. But the key thing I think that she mentioned, which is different today, is we've had an independent Bank of England that is in charge of monetary policy. In those days, of course, they were well before the days where Mrs. Thatcher brought in the importance of monetary policy. And that's key, I think, today, because, of course, today we've had quite a long period of an independent bank that's been very successful in controlling inflation. And I think that today the bank has unfortunately made some errors, but is back on the business of raising rates to control inflation. And I think we're already seeing the effects of that in the figures. And the tightening of money that we've seen already, and the prospect that rising interest rates will tighten conditions further. And in that context, which is a completely different one from the 70s, I don't think we will have the sort of inflation that effects she's talking about. On the contrary, I think what fiscal policy needs to do today is to complement monetary policy by preventing recession.
But you've
and
suggested...
also, of course, contributing to growth will help the supply side and bring down prices directly.
We're pinning a lot on growth there. What about your thoughts? You suggested that interest rates would have to reach 7%. I mean, that would add hundreds of pounds.
I didn't. That was the Times being quite mischievous, because I never said that. And of course,
what did you say?
I said that interest rates will probably reach about 3%, and that will be the new normal. And actually, they actually had the grace to mention that in their write-up. And 7% is completely off the probability map, and it's they're only 1% already, and they are going to rise, of course. But I think 3% is where they'll go to, and I was completely misquoted by the Times.
Francis, what are your thoughts on what Patrick's suggesting?
I mean, Patrick's absolutely right about the importance of an independent central bank. If I may correct him on something, it was not Mrs. Thatcher who gave the Bank of England its independence. It was Gordon Brown under
I
Tony
didn't
Blair.
say she gave it the independence. I said she introduced monetary tightening and emphasized monetarism, Francis. That's what I said. I mean, I know
Yeah,
that Gordon Brown gave them the independence, but the point is that it was monetary policy that was stressed by Mrs. Thatcher against the whole establishment view of the civil service in the 70s.
Raising corporation tax to 25%, there is one really simple way for businesses to pay less corporation tax, and that's to invest more in their companies, in their workforces, in their productivity.
Well, I know this whole super deduction idea of Rishi Sunak's is, I think, a classic example of interventionism, because what it means is that you raise corporation tax, so reduce the profitability of investment, but then you sort of manipulate firms to invest by saying, well, if you invest, we won't charge you.
So this
But
is the
this
super
misses the
deduction
point.
lets companies cut their tax bills by up to 25 pence for every pound that they invest. But isn't that the kind of thing where it will encourage people to invest, and it could benefit those smaller businesses that Francis was talking about?
Not really, because if you basically take away the incentives for profitability, you're not going to get the sort of innovation that firms will do when there's profitability, and that in turn leads to investment. So I think this whole idea of trying to sort of cleverly manipulate people into investing when there's no profitability due to, or reduction in profitability due to the corporation tax is a highly interventionist, manipulative procedure, which forgets that in any case, investment comes after innovation and productivity growth, and that in turn also triggers intangible investment, which is more important really than the sort of investment that is going to be artificially stimulated by this interventionism.
I mean, you're sort of betting the farm on that, though, in the current climate, aren't you? The Office for Budget Responsibility says that the UK's debt at the moment is on track to reach almost 320% of GDP in 50 years' time, unless taxes rise or spending falls, or both.
Well, at least the IFS is trying to do long-term projections of the debt ratio, which is, I think, the right way to do this, and not these rather silly short-term rules which aren't addressing the issue of the debt ratio. I mean, of course, this projection of theirs is highly questionable because it's so far ahead. We've done projections over the next 10 years or so, which suggest a very different situation because, of course, if you get some growth into the economy and maintain the sort of growth that we ought to have, the debt ratio will come down quite steadily over the next 10 years. And
Patrick,
that's the way to look at it.
why do you think so many mainstream economists disagree with your projections?
Well, I haven't seen anybody make the projections for the next 10 years. I mean, the IFS have talked about the next 30 years and have included in that all sorts of assumptions about public spending needs over the next 30 years, which we need to think about rather carefully. And of course, a part of the story, I think what we need for the British economy is a framework, a solid framework of a favorable corporate environment. And I agree with Francis about necessary public spending, but it should be possible to produce a favorable environment for investment and innovation, and also keep a grip on the long term, on spending, so that environment is consistent with solvency. And what we've done so far in our calculations is to find that over the next 10 years that is indeed possible, and that the debt ratio will steadily come down. I mean, if you look at our history, the debt ratio has been over 200% a couple of times in our history, after big wars, Napoleonic and World War II, and it's come down steadily as a result.
Sure, but thank you both so much.